The small cafe sat quietly on the corner of the street. Morning sunlight came through the windows, painting warm golden lines across the old wooden floor. The smell of roasted coffee beans floated in the air, mixing with the faint sound of spoons clinking against cups. Most of the customers were regulars, office workers grabbing breakfast before work, students reading books, and a few locals who simply came for the company of familiar faces. It was not a fancy place, but it had a comfort that made people return day after day. On this particular morning, a man walked in who did not look like he belonged there, though no one noticed. He wore a plain jacket, slightly faded jeans, and ordinary sneakers. His hair was combed neatly, but nothing about him drew attention. He looked like any other man stopping for a quick coffee. In truth, he was a billionaire, one of the most powerful men in the country. He had chosen to leave behind his luxury cars, private jets, and expensive suits just for a few hours. He wanted to experience life as an ordinary person, without anyone knowing his name or wealth. He took a seat at a small table near the window. From where he sat, he could see the entire cafe. His eyes followed the movement of the staff behind the counter, the barista pouring milk into lattes, the cook flipping pancakes, and, most of all, the waitress who hurried between tables. She was a black woman, maybe in her late 20s, wearing a simple uniform with a small apron tied around her waist. Her smile was gentle but faint, the kind of smile that hides long hours of work and deep exhaustion. She noticed him almost immediately. New customers stood out easily, especially quiet ones who didn't ask for attention. She walked over with a notepad in her hand and gave him the same polite smile she offered every stranger. "Good morning," she said softly. "What can I get for you today?" The man looked up. Her voice carried warmth, even though her eyes showed she was tired. He didn't hesitate. "Just a black coffee," he answered. His words were short, simple, and clear. She nodded and wrote it down quickly. "I'll be right back with that." As she walked away, he leaned back in his chair. He liked observing people. For years, he had lived in boardrooms filled with men in expensive suits, people who talked loudly about profits and deals but rarely about real life. Here, in this small cafe, things felt different. Life was slower, but more honest. The waitress soon returned with a steaming cup of black coffee. She placed it gently on the table, careful not to spill a drop. "Here you go," she said. He thanked her quietly, and she moved on to another table where two children were arguing over pancakes. As he took his first sip, the taste was strong and rich, with just the right amount of bitterness. He let the warmth fill him. At the same time, his eyes stayed on the waitress. She moved quickly, almost like she was dancing between tables. One moment she carried a tray of food, the next she bent down to pick up a fork that had fallen. Sometimes she smiled genuinely, but often her smile was only for show. He noticed something unusual: she never lost her patience. Even when one customer snapped his fingers rudely to get her attention, she simply walked over calmly and asked what he needed. She didn't raise her voice or frown. She carried herself with quiet dignity, though it was clear that she was carrying a heavy weight on her shoulders. The billionaire, in his disguise, wondered about her life. Did she enjoy this work? Was she here by choice, or because she had no other option? There was something about the way she moved that told him she was stronger than she seemed. She wasn't just a waitress, she was someone holding together more than just trays and coffee cups. As the morning went on, the cafe grew busier. A group of office workers entered, talking loudly about deadlines. A mother came in with a baby stroller, and the waitress rushed to hold the door open for her while balancing plates in her other hand. The billionaire watched silently. He was used to people holding doors open for him, used to staff serving him with perfect manners because they knew who he was. But here, no one knew him. He was invisible, and he liked it. The waitress passed by his table again, refilling his cup without asking if he wanted more. She had already noticed he liked his coffee strong and plain. That small detail impressed him. She paid attention in ways many people never did. Behind her smile, though, he could see traces of fatigue. There were faint circles under her eyes, the kind that come from sleepless nights. Her steps were fast, but there was a heaviness in her body that told its own story. He thought of how many people like her worked long hours every day without being noticed, without anyone thanking them. The billionaire felt a small tug inside his chest. He had always believed in working hard, but he also knew the unfairness of the world. He could spend millions in a single meeting, while she probably worked all week just to cover rent. Still, she didn't complain. She moved with grace, as if she carried her struggles silently, refusing to let them show to strangers. When their eyes met briefly, he offered her a kind smile. She returned it, though hers carried a hidden message, one he could not fully understand. Something told him there was more to her story than he could see from this table. He continued drinking his coffee slowly, not rushing to leave. For him, this was more than just a cup of coffee. It was a reminder of the real world outside his mansions and companies. And for her, it was just another customer, another cup served, another moment in a long day. Neither of them knew that before this day ended, one small action would change both of their lives forever. The cafe grew louder as more customers came in, but the man at the corner table did not mind. He sipped his coffee slowly, letting the warmth settle inside him. While he appeared calm on the outside, his eyes kept following the waitress. She moved from table to table with the same quiet energy, balancing trays, refilling cups, and offering polite smiles. Her hands were quick, her eyes sharp, and yet there was a softness in the way she spoke to people. Even when the customers were impatient, even when someone complained that their food was late, she never raised her voice. She answered kindly, as if she carried a secret patience that most people could not understand. The billionaire disguised as an ordinary man was used to seeing people at their best only when they wanted something from him. In his world of wealth, people often wore fake smiles to please him. But here, in this little cafe, the waitress's smile was different. It was not perfect. It was a little tired, a little worn, but real. He could see that she was working hard not because she loved waiting tables, but because she had no other choice. She was not serving coffee to make a living dream come true, she was doing it to survive. Behind the counter, a young barista joked with another worker, laughing loudly as he poured milk into a tall cup. The waitress passed by them, carrying 3 heavy plates on one arm. The barista barely noticed. The billionaire could see the difference. While the others seemed carefree, she carried the weight of responsibility in every step. At one table, 2 businessmen in sharp suits tapped their feet impatiently. They had laptops open and kept checking their watches. When the waitress finally reached them, one of the men sighed loudly. "We've been waiting forever," he complained. She smiled softly and apologized, though she had been running non-stop since she started her shift. She wrote down their order quickly and rushed back to the kitchen, never letting frustration show. The billionaire lowered his cup slowly. He thought of the boardrooms he usually sat in, the endless meetings about profits and investments. Those men in suits reminded him of his own world, where people often forgot that workers like her were the ones holding everything together. He wondered if anyone had ever truly noticed her strength, her dignity, the way she gave so much of herself in exchange for so little. As he watched her, he began to imagine her life outside this cafe. The way her shoulders tensed and her eyes sometimes looked distant told him she carried worries beyond these walls. He pictured her returning home after a long day, slipping off her shoes in a small apartment, maybe cooking dinner for someone who depended on her. He imagined her counting the tips she earned, hoping it would be enough for the week. In truth, the waitress's life was harder than anyone in the cafe knew. At home, she lived with her younger brother and her ill mother. Her brother was still in high school, full of dreams of going to college, but tuition was expensive. Their mother, once strong and full of energy, had fallen sick and could no longer work. The waitress had become the backbone of her family, working double shifts to pay rent, buy groceries, and keep the lights on. Every day, she woke up before sunrise, helped her mother take medicine, reminded her brother to study hard, and then rushed out to work. She did not complain to anyone. She never told customers about her struggles. She knew most people would not care, and besides, she carried her pride quietly. But in her heart, she longed for something more, for a chance to break free from the cycle of endless work. She dreamed of a better life, not only for herself but for her family. As the billionaire watched her, he noticed how she treated every customer equally. She spoke kindly to the children who spilled juice, comforted the mother whose baby cried loudly, and even managed to calm down the angry man who claimed his toast was burnt. He could see she had learned to carry not only plates but also the moods and tempers of strangers. When she came to refill his cup again, their eyes met for a moment longer than before. He gave her a small smile. She hesitated, as if she wanted to say something, but then simply nodded and moved on. He could sense there was something in her heart she wanted to share, but she held it back. The billionaire felt a strange pull inside him. He had spent years building empires, buying companies, and expanding his wealth, but none of it gave him the feeling he now had, sitting in a simple cafe, watching this woman work. It was not pity he felt. It was respect. Respect for the quiet strength of someone who gave her best when the world gave her so little in return. Outside, cars honked, and the city rushed on. But inside the cafe, time felt slower. The billionaire tapped his fingers lightly against the cup, thinking about the choices he had made in life. He had always believed he understood people, but now he realized he had lived far away from this kind of reality. He had seen wealth, ambition, and power. But here, he was seeing resilience, humility, and quiet courage. The waitress moved again to the counter, where she wiped a spill before it could spread. The barista teased her, but she only smiled faintly and continued working. Her hands never stopped. She seemed like someone carrying an invisible burden, but refusing to let it crush her spirit. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, watching as she hurried to serve another table. He thought of the people he had met: politicians, CEOs, celebrities, but none of them had moved him the way this waitress did, without even speaking a word. Something about her told him she was not ordinary. She was a fighter, though she wore no armor. She was a leader, though she had no title. And though she had no idea, her story was about to connect with his in a way that neither of them expected. In the middle of ordinary lives, extraordinary moments are born. The billionaire did not know exactly what would happen next, but he knew that the woman serving coffee was about to change everything. The cafe had grown busy, and the air was filled with the sounds of conversation, clattering dishes, and the hiss of the coffee machine. The man at the corner table sat quietly, still disguised in his simple clothes. His coffee cup was nearly empty, and he held it loosely in his hand, lost in thought. The waitress had passed his table several times already, always with the same tired but polite smile. Something about her moved him, though he couldn't fully explain why. She had a way of holding herself together even as the demands of her work pulled her in every direction. She noticed his cup was low and walked over, carrying the coffee pot. Her steps were quick but measured, her apron slightly wrinkled from the morning rush. "Would you like a refill?" she asked softly. He nodded, and she poured the dark liquid carefully until it nearly reached the rim. For a moment, she lingered, as though considering something. Her eyes studied him, and he felt as if she were trying to decide whether to take a step she had been thinking about for some time. When she set the pot back on the tray, her hand slid beneath his saucer. He did not see it at first, but he heard the faint sound of paper brushing the ceramic plate. She gave a faint smile, almost nervous, and then walked away without a word. The billionaire looked down. Tucked just under the edge of the saucer was a folded note. His heart beat faster. He was not used to surprises like this. People usually recognized him, or they treated him with calculated politeness because they wanted something. But this woman didn't know who he was. Why would she leave him a note? He waited until she disappeared behind the counter before picking it up. The paper was slightly crumpled, as if it had been folded and unfolded many times before. His fingers hesitated as he opened it, wondering what kind of message he was about to read. Inside, the handwriting was neat but hurried. The words were simple, yet each one carried weight. You don't know me, and I don't know you. But if you are sitting here alone, I want you to remember something: the people serving you, cleaning after you, and carrying trays have stories too. Some of us are fighting battles you can't see. The world looks at us as just workers, but we are more than that. We are mothers, daughters, brothers, and dreamers. Never forget to notice the ones people walk past every day. The billionaire's hands trembled slightly as he read the words again and again. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't a request for help. It was a truth, raw and unfiltered. He felt something stir inside him, something that boardroom speeches and luxury gatherings had never given him. The note cut straight through the armor he wore as a wealthy man. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the paper. All around him, the cafe carried on as usual, orders being shouted to the kitchen, cups clinking, laughter from a group of students near the back. Yet, in that moment, everything felt different. Her words made the noise fade. He thought of how often he had passed people like her without really seeing them. Waiters, drivers, cleaners' faces he hardly noticed while rushing through his busy life. She was right. They were not invisible. They were human, carrying dreams and struggles, yet rarely noticed by people like him. The billionaire pressed the note flat against the table with his palm. He felt an ache in his chest, a deep sense of humility. He had spent years building a life where everything was within his reach: money, influence, recognition. But this small note, written on a scrap of paper by a tired waitress, shook him in a way nothing else had. He glanced up and saw her again. She was wiping down a table, her movements quick but graceful. She did not look at him, as if pretending nothing had happened. It was clear she had not written the note for attention. She had written it because she needed anyone to hear it. She did not know her words had landed in the hands of a man whose decisions could change lives with the stroke of a pen. The billionaire thought back to his own life. He remembered his younger days, long before the suits and boardrooms. He had grown up in a modest neighborhood, raised by parents who worked hard but struggled. He knew what it felt like to watch a parent stretch every dollar. Somewhere along the way, after building his empire, he had forgotten those roots. This note pulled him back to that memory. His mind wandered. What battles was she fighting? Was there a sick parent at home? A child she was supporting? A dream she had to put on hold because life demanded sacrifice? He realized he wanted to know her story. Not because of pity, but because of admiration. She had spoken a truth most people were too afraid to say. For the rest of the hour, he sat quietly, the note resting by his cup. Every time she passed, he thought of calling her over, but he didn't. He wanted to see if she would say more. She didn't. She worked as if nothing had happened, carrying trays, smiling at customers, and ignoring the weight of her own message. The billionaire folded the note carefully and placed it in his pocket. He knew he would never throw it away. It was a reminder he needed, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful lessons came not from those in high places, but from the ones who worked quietly in the background. As he prepared to leave, he felt his heart heavy with thought. He wanted to say something to her, but the words wouldn't come out. He left money on the table for his bill and stood up slowly. She noticed him and walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. "Thank you for coming," she said kindly, her tone no different than it was for any other customer. He opened his mouth to respond but stopped himself. For now, he would keep his thoughts to himself. But he knew this was not the end. He would return, not just for coffee, but for the truth she had given him so unexpectedly. As he walked out of the cafe, the cool air hit his face. He held the folded note tightly in his hand. It was just a few lines on a piece of paper, but it carried more weight than the millions he had spent on business ventures. He realized something important that morning: sometimes the smallest voices carried the greatest power. And though she did not know it yet, the waitress had just changed the course of his life. The next morning was quieter than usual in the cafe. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting soft light across the street outside. A few early customers had already come in for their coffee, but the real rush had not yet started. The waitress moved about with her usual quiet energy, carrying trays, greeting customers, and wiping down tables. She had tied her apron neatly, though the tired look in her eyes had not faded. The man returned, dressed once again in simple clothes that gave no clue about his true life. He had spent most of the night thinking about the note she had given him. It had stayed in his pocket, folded carefully as though it were the most valuable document he had ever owned. He had read it several times, each word reminding him of something he had forgotten in the world of wealth and power: the value of people, the dignity of work, and the quiet courage of those often overlooked. He walked into the cafe with calm steps and took his usual place at the corner table. The waitress noticed him almost immediately. She gave a polite nod, though there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. She wondered if he had read the note, if he had understood what she had written, but she did not ask. Instead, she approached his table and greeted him the same way she greeted every customer. "Good morning," she said softly. "Would you like the usual?" He smiled faintly. "Yes, please." "Black coffee?" She nodded and went to prepare it. When she returned, placing the steaming cup on his table, he stopped her before she could walk away. His voice was calm but firm, and it carried weight. "May I ask your name?" he said. The question surprised her. Customers rarely asked. Most people never looked at her name tag, and even if they did, they forgot it moments later. She hesitated, uncertain if she should answer. Finally, she said, "It's Grace." The name seemed to fit her perfectly. Grace: quiet strength, calm under pressure, dignity even in the face of struggle. The billionaire repeated it softly to himself, as if memorizing it. "Grace," he said, "that's a strong name." She gave a small smile but looked nervous. "Is everything all right?" she asked. She wondered if the note had offended him somehow. Perhaps he had taken her words the wrong way. Perhaps he thought she had been rude. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the table. "I read your note," he said. His voice was steady, but there was something in his eyes, something deep, almost heavy. "Your words, they stopped me cold." Her breath caught in her throat. She looked down, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I shouldn't have written it. I didn't mean to upset you. Sometimes I just..." He raised his hand gently to stop her. "No. Don't apologize. You didn't upset me. You made me think. And that is something I haven't done in a long time." She looked at him, confused. Customers rarely spoke like this. For most people, she was invisible, just another worker in a uniform. But this man spoke to her as if her words mattered. There was silence between them for a moment. Around them, the cafe carried on as usual. A couple at the window shared a pastry, a man scrolled through his phone while sipping tea, and the barista hummed a tune behind the counter. But at that corner table, everything felt still. The billionaire knew he could not hide any longer. He had come here to disappear into the crowd, to live like an ordinary man for a while. But her note had reminded him of something bigger. It had reminded him of responsibility, not just the kind that came with managing businesses, but the responsibility of listening to voices that were too often ignored. He took a deep breath. "Grace," he said slowly, "there is something I must tell you. I haven't been honest about who I am." Her eyes widened slightly. She stepped back, uncertain. "What do you mean?" He straightened in his chair. His voice carried quiet authority now, though he kept it low. "My name is Daniel Hart. I am not just another man ordering coffee. I am the founder of Hart Global. I am," he paused, almost reluctant, "a billionaire." The words hung in the air. Grace stared at him, stunned. For a moment, she wondered if this was some kind of joke. But his face was serious, his eyes steady. She had heard the name before everyone had. Hart Global was known around the world. It owned airlines, hotels, and technology companies. She blinked, trying to match the name with the ordinary-looking man who sat before her, sipping black coffee. The cafe grew strangely quiet. A few nearby customers had overheard and were now whispering among themselves. The barista behind the counter froze, staring wide-eyed. Slowly, the sound of chatter faded, as if everyone was holding their breath. Grace's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She remembered the note, the bold words she had written. She felt exposed, almost foolish. I didn't know," she whispered. Daniel shook his head gently. "That's the point. You didn't know. And yet, you spoke the truth. You reminded me of something I had forgotten. You see, Grace, when you reach a certain level of wealth and power, people stop telling you the truth. They only tell you what you want to hear. But you reminded me of the people I built my empire on. People like you, working quietly, holding everything together. Your words meant more to me than you can imagine." Her eyes filled with confusion and a touch of disbelief. She shifted her weight nervously. "I was just writing what I felt," she said softly. "And that," he replied, "is what makes it powerful." The cafe remained silent. Every eye seemed to be on them, though Grace wished they weren't. She had never wanted attention. She had never sought recognition. She only wanted to share something honest. Yet here she was, standing across from one of the richest men in the country, her note burning in her memory. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded paper. He placed it gently on the table. "I will keep this with me," he said. "It's worth more than any contract I've signed." Grace looked at him, speechless. She had no idea how to respond. She wanted to tell him she was just a waitress, just an ordinary woman trying to survive. But his eyes told her he saw more in her than she saw in herself. At last, she whispered, "Why are you telling me this?" He paused, then answered with quiet honesty. "Because you deserve to know that your words have power. And because sometimes, the richest man in the room needs to be reminded of what truly matters." The silence in the cafe broke when a customer coughed, trying to return to normal. But the atmosphere had changed. Grace stood still, her heart pounding, unsure what this moment would mean for her life. Daniel took another slow sip of his coffee, as if giving her time to breathe. He knew one thing for certain, this encounter was no accident. Their paths had crossed for a reason. And as he looked at Grace still standing there in her simple uniform, still carrying the quiet strength that had first caught his attention, he realized that his life, and perhaps hers, was about to change forever. The cafe slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but for Grace, nothing felt normal anymore. Her heart was still racing from the conversation she had just had with Daniel Hart, the billionaire who had revealed himself to her in the middle of an ordinary morning shift. She moved back behind the counter, wiping her hands nervously on her apron, trying to focus on her work. But her thoughts were scattered. She couldn't stop replaying his words in her mind. He had said her note mattered. He had said her voice had power. Daniel sat quietly at the corner table, his black coffee now cold. He wasn't looking at the menu, or his phone, or even the people around him. His eyes stayed on Grace as if he were studying her, as if she was the most important person in the room. He didn't see her uniform or her tired eyes, he saw her strength, her honesty, her courage to say something real. He had met countless politicians, world leaders, and corporate giants, but none of them had touched him the way this waitress had with a simple handwritten note. When Grace passed by again, he stood up. His tall frame and calm authority made several heads turn. He walked toward her, and for a brief second, she thought he was leaving. Instead, he stopped in front of her. "Grace," he said, his voice gentle but certain. "I want to ask you something important." She blinked, unsure of what to expect. "Yes." He pulled a card from his wallet and held it out to her. The card was simple, embossed with his name and a phone number that very few people had access to. "I want you to come see me," he said. "Not as a waitress, but as a voice I need in my foundation." Your words opened my eyes. I believe they could open the eyes of many others too. Grace stared at the card, stunned. Her hand trembled as she took it. She didn't know what to say. She had never imagined that the man sitting in her cafe would turn out to be someone so powerful. And she had never imagined that her simple note words written in a moment of courage would lead to something like this. I don't understand," she whispered. Daniel smiled kindly. "You don't need to right now. Just know this: your story matters. Your perspective matters. And I believe you could help me build something that makes life better for people like you, people who work hard but are too often unseen." Her throat tightened with emotion. For so long, she had carried her struggles silently. She had never expected anyone to notice. And now, this man, this billionaire, was telling her that her story was worth hearing. Around them, customers pretended not to listen, but it was clear the entire cafe was watching. Grace felt the weight of their eyes, but Daniel's calm presence steadied her. He wasn't making a show of it. He wasn't doing this for attention. He meant every word. Finally, she managed to speak. "I have my family," she said softly. "My brother is still in school, and my mother is sick. I can't just leave them." Daniel nodded, his eyes full of understanding. "I'm not asking you to abandon them. In fact, I want to help. Your brother deserves a future, and your mother deserves care. Let me take some of that weight off your shoulders so you can stand taller. You've been carrying too much for too long." Grace felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. She didn't want to cry in front of a room full of strangers. Still, the kindness in his words struck her deeply. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "I've built my fortune on numbers, deals, and strategy. But your note reminded me that money without meaning is empty. I want you to help me bring meaning back into the work I do. Will you consider it?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. She could only nod faintly, her voice trapped by emotion. Daniel placed a generous tip on the counter, far more than she earned in a week. But more than that, he left her with a sense of hope she had not felt in years. He gave her one last reassuring smile before walking out of the cafe. The bell over the door jingled softly, and then he was gone, leaving behind silence and whispers. Grace held the card tightly in her hand. She looked at it again and again, as if making sure it was real. Around her, the cafe customers tried to return to their meals, but she felt as though her whole world had shifted. That night, she went home to the small apartment where her younger brother was finishing his homework at the kitchen table. Her mother lay resting in the bedroom, coughing softly. Grace placed the card on the table, and her brother looked up. "What's that?" he asked curiously. Grace hesitated, then said quietly, "It might be the start of something new." She told him about Daniel, though she left out the details about his wealth, knowing her brother might not believe it. Instead, she told him about the opportunity. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to dream out loud. Her brother's eyes lit up. "Grace, maybe this is our chance," he said. She smiled faintly, hope flickering inside her chest. In the weeks that followed, Grace did meet Daniel again. He welcomed her into his foundation, not as a token figure, but as a trusted voice. She sat at tables she never imagined sitting at, speaking about the struggles of ordinary workers, the realities of families fighting to survive. At first, she was nervous, but Daniel reminded her again and again, "Just speak the truth. That's what makes you powerful." And so she did. Slowly, her life began to change. Her brother received a scholarship supported by the foundation, her mother was given proper medical care, and Grace herself found new purpose. She was no longer just a waitress in a small cafe. She had become a voice for the unseen, someone who reminded the powerful that behind every job was a human being with a story. Daniel never forgot that morning when she slipped him the note. He carried it with him always, tucked safely in his wallet. It became his reminder that sometimes the smallest act of folded piece of paper, a few honest words could change the direction of a life. For Grace, it was proof that even when the world overlooks you, your voice can still reach the highest places. And for Daniel, it was proof that even the richest man can still be humbled by the truth written by someone serving coffee. Two lives, from two very different worlds, had crossed in the most unexpected way. And from that moment on, neither of them would ever be the same.